My name is Penelope, and I am 28 years old. Today I lead a comfortable life as an art gallery curator in Boston, surrounded by beautiful creations and wonderful friends. But 20 years ago, I was just an 8-year-old girl sitting by the window at my neighbor's house watching the street for my mother, who promised she'd be back in an hour. Hours turned to days, days turned to years. Then last month, my carefully constructed peace was shattered by a single phone call. If you're watching this from a place where family abandoned you, to hit subscribe and share where you're from in the comments. Let me know if you'd forgive someone who left you behind. Growing up with my single mother Julia in our small Chicago apartment wasn't always easy, but it was filled with love. From my earliest memories at age 5 until that fateful day when I was 8, Mum worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and back then, that felt like more than enough. Sunday mornings were sacred in our home. No matter how tired she was from working double shifts at the diner and evening cleaning jobs, Mum would wake me up with the smell of cookie dough. I'd stumble into our tiny kitchen to find her mixing chocolate chips into the batter, her hair pulled into a messy bun, still in her pajamas. "Remember when you add too many chocolate chips, they'll melt all over the oven shed," say, guiding my small hand as I drop them into the mixing bowl. But honestly, is there really such a thing as too much chocolate? Those mornings with sunlight streaming through our kitchen window and the warm smell of cookies filling our apartment were perfect. Mum would braid my hair while the cookies baked her gentle fingers, working through my tangled curls as she hummed softly. She always managed to make me feel like a princess, even when we couldn't afford new clothes or fancy toys. At night, when the weather was clear, we'd drag our kitchen chairs out to our tiny balcony. We would wrap ourselves in blankets and look up at the stars, making up constellations and telling stories about the shapes we saw. "That one looks like a brave knight," Mum would say, pointing upward. "And look, there's his loyal dog following right behind him." I'd squint my eyes and nod enthusiastically, even when I couldn't see what she was describing. It didn't matter. It was our special time together. But things began to change about 6 months before she left. I noticed it in small ways at first. Mum started getting phone calls that made her voice drop to a whisper. She'd turn away from me, stepping into the hallway outside our apartment to finish conversations. Her smile became strained, and the dark circles under her eyes grew deeper. Despite the concealer she carefully applied each morning, I remember asking her if everything was okay one night. After she hung up the phone, her hands shaking slightly. "Everything's fine, sweetie," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But I did worry, especially when strange men started showing up at our apartment. They never stayed long. Just quick conversations at the door while Mum would usher me into my bedroom with a colouring book or a puzzle. I could hear their hushed, urgent tones through the thin walls, though I could never make out the exact words. Around this time, we started spending more time with our neighbour, Mrs. Abernathy. She lived across the hall, a kind elderly woman with silver hair, always perfectly set in soft curls. Her apartment smelled like lavender and freshly baked bread, and her walls were covered with photos of grandchildren who rarely visited. "Penelope is such a good girl," Mrs. Abernathy would tell my mother when she'd pick me up after leaving me there, while she worked or ran mysterious errands. "You should be proud." Mum would nod, her eyes glistening with what I now recognise as guilt. "I am. She's the best thing I've ever done." The last normal day we spent together was a Saturday. Mum had the day off, a rare occurrence, and we went to the park. It was early autumn with leaves just beginning to turn golden at their edges. We packed sandwiches and apple slices in a small cooler, and Mum pushed me on the swings until my stomach hurt from laughing. Later we got ice cream from a truck parked near the playground. I chose strawberry and Mum got vanilla. I remember how she kept glancing over her shoulder as we ate, her eyes scanning the park entrance repeatedly. "Is someone meeting us here?" I asked strawberry ice cream, dripping down my cone onto my fingers. She startled slightly. "No, baby. Just enjoying the day with my favourite person." We walked home slowly, taking the long route through the neighbourhood. Mum pointed out dogs in windows and interesting doorways, but her mind seemed far away. As we climbed the stairs to our apartment, she suddenly knelt down to my level, her hands on my shoulders. "Penelope, you know I love you more than anything in the world, right?" she said, her eyes intensely focused on mine. "I know, Mummy," I replied, confused by her serious tone. "Sometimes people have to make hard choices for the ones they love, even when those choices hurt. I hope someday you'll understand that." I didn't understand what she meant then. I just nodded because she seemed to need me to. That night she tucked me in with extra care, reading 3 bedtime stories instead of our usual one. She sat on the edge of my bed long after I closed my eyes, her hand gently stroking my hair. In my last moments of consciousness, I felt her press a lingering kiss to my forehead. I had no way of knowing it would be the last night I'd spend in my own bed for years. No way of knowing that the next day would permanently divide my life into before and after. The morning she left started like any ordinary day. I woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Mum humming in the kitchen. When I shuffled out in my pajamas hair, a tangled mess, she turned and gave me a smile that seemed a little too bright. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, flipping a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate. "I made your favorite breakfast." The pancakes were stacked higher than usual with sliced bananas arranged in a smiley face on top. A generous drizzle of maple syrup completed the special breakfast that normally we only had on birthdays or the first day of school. "What's the occasion?" I asked, climbing onto a kitchen chair. "Does a mother need an occasion to spoil her daughter?" she replied, but there was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. A tightness maybe, or a tremble. Throughout breakfast, Mum kept reaching across the table to touch my hand or smooth my hair. She asked questions about my friends at school and what we'd been learning, listening intently to my answers as if memorizing them. When I finished eating, she hugged me longer than usual, her arms wrapped tightly around me. After breakfast, while I was getting dressed, I noticed Mum packing a small bag. She carefully folded my favourite purple t-shirt with the glittery butterfly on the front, a pair of jeans, clean underwear and socks. She added my stuffed rabbit Floppy, whose ear was worn thin from years of being rubbed between my fingers at bedtime. "Are we going somewhere?" I asked, excited at the prospect of an adventure. She zipped the bag closed. "We're going to visit Mrs. Abernathy for a little while," she said. "Is it a sleepover?" I bounced on my toes. Mrs. Abernathy always let me help bake cookies and didn't mind when I wanted to watch cartoons. Mum hesitated. "Maybe. Well, see." She helped me put on my jacket, though it wasn't particularly cold out. Then she knelt in front of me, straightening my collar with trembling hands. "You be good for Mrs. Abernathy, okay?" Mum said, her eyes searching my face as if committing it to memory. "Listen to what she tells you." "I always do," I replied, confused by her intensity. "I know you do, baby. You're such a good girl." She took my hand in hers as we left the apartment. I remember how tightly she held it as we walked across the hall to Mrs. Abernathy's door. Her knuckles were white, and when I tried to swing our arms the way we usually did when walking together, she kept her arm rigid. Mrs. Abernathy greeted us with her usual warm smile, the scent of something baking wafting from her apartment. Come in," she said, ushering us inside. I just took some snickerdoodles out of the oven. My mother stood awkwardly in the doorway, still holding my hand. Mrs. Abernathy. "Thank you again for watching Penelope," she said. "I'll pick her up as soon as I can. There's no rush, dear. We're going to have a lovely time, aren't we?" Penelope, Mrs. Abernathy winked at me, and I nodded enthusiastically. Mum knelt down again, placing the small packed bag on the floor beside me. She cupped my face in her hands, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I need to run a quick errand." "I'll be back in an hour, sweetie," she said, her voice catching slightly on the last word. She kissed me, then a kiss that felt different from her usual goodbye pecks. This one lingered, her lips pressed firmly against my forehead, as if trying to leave an imprint. When she pulled away, a single tear had escaped and was making its way down her cheek. "I love you, Penelope." "Never forget that, okay?" she whispered. "Love you too, Mum," I replied casually, already eyeing the cookies cooling on Mrs. Abernathy's counter. With one last look, my mother turned and walked out the door. That was the last time I would see her for 20 years. The first few hours at Mrs. Abernathy's were normal enough. We ate cookies and played card games. She let me watch my favourite cartoon show, and we worked on a jigsaw puzzle of a countryside scene. I wasn't worried yet. An hour could stretch into 2 or 3 when Mum was running errands, sometimes buses ran late, or lines at the store were long. It was only when the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across Mrs. Abernathy's living room that I felt the first flutter of anxiety. I'd been sitting by the window for the past 30 minutes, watching for Mum to appear on the street below. Mrs. Abernathy checked her watch for the 3rd time in an hour. Her forehead creased with concern. "Perhaps your mother got held up at work," she suggested, though I hadn't mentioned Mum going to work that day. "She said an errand," I corrected. "Just an hour." Mrs. Abernathy patted my shoulder. "Sometimes errands take longer than expected. I'm sure she'll be here soon. How about we start dinner?" But as we ate spaghetti at Mrs. Abernathy's small dining table, The seat we'd left for Mum remained empty. After dinner, I returned to my post by the window, pressing my nose against the glass until it fogged with my breath. The street lamps came on, illuminating empty sidewalks. By bedtime, Mrs. Abernathy was clearly worried. She tried calling my mother, her finger dialing the number carefully from the paper we'd left. Her frown deepened as she listened. "The number you've reached is no longer in service," she repeated slowly after hanging up. "How strange." She tried to hide her concern as she tucked me into the fold-out sofa bed in her living room, but I could see it in the tight lines around her mouth. "Your mother will surely be here in the morning, dear. Sometimes grown-ups have emergencies. Try not to worry," she said, smoothing the blanket over me. But in the darkness of Mrs. Abernathy's living room, clutching Floppy to my chest, the first real tears came. Something was wrong. Mum had never left me this long before. I cried quietly into my pillow, not wanting Mrs. Abernathy to hear. The next morning, Mrs. Abernathy suggested we go back to our apartment to check if Mum had come home and maybe fallen asleep. I nodded eagerly, hope blooming in my chest. Of course. Mum must have come home late and not wanted to disturb us. But when Mrs. Abernathy used her emergency key to open our apartment door, the hope withered inside me. The apartment felt different, empty somehow, though at first glance everything looked normal. It was only as we moved through the rooms that I noticed what was missing. Mum's favourite jacket no longer hung by the door. Her hairbrush and perfume were gone from the bathroom. The framed photo of her holding me as a baby that always sat on her nightstand had disappeared. Her closet stood half-empty hangers askew as if clothes had been grabbed hastily. Mrs. Abernathy guided me back to her apartment, her hand gentle on my shoulder as my world collapsed around me. She made phone calls while I sat motionless on her couch, Floppy clutched to my chest. For 3 days I barely moved from the window, convinced that any minute I'd see Mum walking up the street toward us. Mrs. Abernathy coaxed me to eat, to sleep, to bathe, but I existed in a fog of confusion and grief. "Where did she go?" I asked repeatedly. "When is she coming back?" Mrs. Abernathy had no answers, only gentle reassurances that grew less convincing with each passing day. On the 3rd day, 2 people in professional clothing arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's door. They introduced themselves as social workers. They spoke to Mrs. Abernathy in hushed tones while casting sympathetic glances my way. I only caught fragments of their conversation abandoned. No relatives, foster care, temporary placement. The fog I had been living in suddenly cleared, replaced by sharp, terrible clarity. Mum wasn't coming back. When the social workers explained that I would need to go with them, Mrs. Abernathy pulled them aside, her voice urgent but low. "Can't I keep her?" she pleaded. "She knows me. She trusts me. This would be less traumatic." I watched from the couch, Floppy clutched to my chest as the female social worker shook her head regretfully. "We're sorry, Mrs. Abernathy," she said gently. "At your age, you wouldn't qualify as a foster parent. There are physical requirements, home studies background checks." Mrs. Abernathy looked devastated. "She's already lost her mother. Must she lose her home too?" But rules were rules, and at 8 years old I had no say in what happened to me. They gave me an hour to pack what little I had. Mrs. Abernathy helped me gather my belongings, her hands shaking as she folded my clothes into a garbage bag the social workers had brought. Before I left, Mrs. Abernathy pressed something into my hand, a small silver locket on a chain. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Inside is a picture of you and me from when we baked cookies last Christmas. This way you'll always have a piece of home with you." She fastened it around my neck and pulled me into a tight hug. "I'll stay in touch, dear. I'll write to you. And if your mother comes back, I'll make sure she finds you." The first foster home was with the Johnsons, a couple in their 40s, who lived in a different part of Chicago. They had 4 other foster children and their own teenage son, Mrs. Johnson was kind but perpetually exhausted. Her smile strained as she showed me to a bedroom I would share with 2 other girls. "You'll be okay here," she said, helping me unpack my meager belongings. "The girls are nice. Dinner is at 6. The Johnsons' house was chaotic but not unkind. There simply wasn't enough attention to go around. I became quiet, fading into the background, spending hours staring out windows, much like I'd done at Mrs. Abernathy's. School became a battleground. Somehow word got out that my mother had abandoned me. Children can be cruel, and their taunts cut deep. "What's wrong with you that your own mother didn't want you?" a girl named Amanda asked during recess, her friends giggling behind her. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know the answer myself. By the time I had been with the Johnsons for 6 months, I had developed a protective shell. I spoke only when spoken to. I learnt to need nothing to expect nothing. I wrote letters to Mrs. Abernethy that Mr. Johnson mailed for me, and I waited eagerly for her replies, which came faithfully every 2 weeks. But the Johnsons were overwhelmed. When a placement opened up with another family, they suggested I might be happier there. Just like that, I was packing my garbage bag again. The Martins were my second foster family, and they were nothing like the Johnsons. Their house was immaculate with plastic covers on the furniture and rules posted on the refrigerator. Mr. Martin was a high school principal, and Mrs. Martin taught piano lessons from their living room. The Martins' house had no chaos, but it also had no warmth. They believed in strict schedules, limited television, and early bedtimes. They never raised their voices, but they never hugged me either. "You need to put your mother out of your mind," Mrs. Martin told me one evening when she caught me looking at an old photo I'd managed to save. She made her choice. Now you need to adjust. It was in the Martins' austere home that I discovered art. During a school field trip to the Art Institute of Chicago, I stood transfixed before a painting of a woman looking out a window, her back to the viewer, her posture suggesting longing. Something about it spoke to me in a language I didn't know I understood. My art teacher, noticing my interest, gave me a sketchbook and some pencils. Drawing became my escape, my voice, my way of processing the grief I wasn't allowed to express in the Martins' quiet house. After nearly 2 years with the Martins when I was 10, they decided to retire to Florida. Once again, I packed my belongings, my clothes, my sketchbooks, Mrs. Abernethy's letters, and the silver locket that never left my neck. The Thompsons were different. From the moment Mrs. Thompson wrapped me in a warm hug at their doorstep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the possibility of safety. The Thompsons' modest home was filled with books, music, and laughter. They had no other children, and they seemed genuinely interested in me. Mr. Thompson helped me with homework, and Mrs. Thompson, seeing my drawings, bought me proper art supplies. "This one has real talent, Jack," she told her husband one evening, showing him a portrait I'd drawn of their cat. "We should nurture this." For the first time since losing my mother, I began to feel like a normal child. I joined the Thompsons for movie nights and Sunday drives. I started making friends at my new school. Mrs. Thompson displayed my artwork on the refrigerator and later framed on the walls. I began to hope, dangerous, terrifying hope, that maybe I could stay that, maybe the Thompsons could become my forever family. Then came the job transfer. Mr. Thompson was offered a position in Seattle that he couldn't refuse. They sat me down one evening, their faces serious. "We want you to know that we love having you here, Penelope," Mrs. Thompson began, reaching for my hand. "But we can't take you with us," Mr. Thompson finished. "The interstate foster system has too many complications. You'd have to re-enter the system in Washington, and there's no guarantee you'd be placed with us." I nodded numbly, already mentally packing my garbage bag. I'd gotten too comfortable. I'd forgotten the first rule of foster care: nothing lasts. Mrs. Thompson was crying. "This isn't what we want," she insisted. "We've looked into every option, but the result was the same. At 12 years old, I was saying goodbye to the third family I'd lost. My teenage years began in my fourth foster home with the Rileys, a younger couple with 2 biological children. They were pleasant enough, but I had learnt my lesson. I kept my distance, emotionally nodding politely at their attempts at connection, but never opening up. At night, I would lie awake, imagining where my mother might be. Was she still in Chicago? Had she started a new family with children she didn't abandon? Did she ever think of me? Wonder how I was doing? Regret her choice? These questions festered, and as I entered adolescence, they transformed into anger. I began testing boundaries, staying out past curfew, responding with sarcasm when asked about my day. I dyed my hair black, wore dark clothing, and glared at anyone who tried to get close. The Rileys' patience wore thin quickly. They had their own children to worry about, and a surly, rebellious foster teen wasn't what they'd signed up for. "Maybe you need a more structured environment," Mrs. Riley suggested after finding me sneaking in at midnight. That was code for "we give up." 3 months later, I was assigned a new social worker, a young woman named Ms. Taylor, who looked overwhelmed by her caseload. Before she could explain where I was going next, I interrupted her. "I'm going to find my mother," I announced. Ms. Taylor sighed. "Penelope, we've been through this. The police searched for your mother when she first disappeared. She left no forwarding address, no contact information." I didn't tell her about my plan. At 14, I'd managed to sneak into the file cabinet in my previous social worker's office during a home visit. I'd memorized my case number, and when Ms. Taylor was distracted by a phone call, I slipped into the records room and found my file. There wasn't much there, just the basic report from when my mother disappeared. No leads, no explanations. But there was one thing I hadn't known. the name of the man my mother had been seeing before she left. David Mercer, described as an associate who couldn't be located for questioning. It wasn't much, but it was something. A name, a thread that might lead to my mother. But before I could pursue it further, I was moved to my 5th foster placement. The Rileys had decided they just couldn't handle me anymore. It was at my new school that I met Mr. Franklin, the art teacher, who had become the first adult since Mrs. Abernathy to truly see me. He noticed my sketches and stayed after class one day to talk about them. "You've got a remarkable eye for detail, Penelope," he said, looking through my sketchbook. "But all of your subjects are turned away looking elsewhere." "Why is that?" I shrugged, uncomfortable with his insight. "Maybe I just like drawing backs," I muttered. He smiled gently. "Art often reveals what's in our subconscious. These drawings suggest someone waiting for another person's return, always watching the distance." His words hit too close to home, and I snatched my sketchbook back. "You're reading too much into it," I said, but we both knew he wasn't. Mr. Franklin became my mentor, encouraging me to explore different mediums and styles. Under his guidance, my art began to evolve. I started painting vibrant emotional pieces that expressed the turmoil I couldn't put into words. The Grants became my longest foster placement, taking me in when I was 16. They were an older couple with grown children, experienced foster parents who had seen it all. Mrs. Grant, with her silver-streaked hair and no-nonsense attitude, wasn't put off by my walls. "We know you've been through a lot," she said on my first night. "We don't expect you to trust us right away. That's earned, not given." Mr. Grant, tall and quiet, gave me my space, but always made sure to include me. "Would you like to help me in the garden this weekend?" he would ask. "No pressure. Just thought you might enjoy getting your hands dirty." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to thaw. The Grants never pushed, never demanded, simply remained steadfastly present. During my time with the Grants, my search for my mother intensified. I spent hours at the public library, using their computers to search social media and people finder websites. I saved every dollar from my part-time job at a local coffee shop building what I called my Find Mum Fund. Then one day, scanning through archived newspaper articles, I found a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like my mother at a community event in San Francisco. The caption didn't name her, but the resemblance was striking. I was sure it was her. It had to be. With shaking hands, I printed the article and brought it home to my room, staring at it for hours. After years of searching, this was my first real lead. Without telling the Grants, I used my savings to buy a bus ticket to San Francisco. I left a note saying I would be back in a few days, packed a small backpack, and slipped out early one Saturday morning. The journey was long and uncomfortable. When I finally arrived in San Francisco, exhausted and disoriented, I made my way to the community center pictured in the article. It was a homeless outreach program in the Mission District. The woman working at the front desk looked at me suspiciously when I showed her the grainy printout. "Yeah, I think that's Diane. She volunteers here sometimes. But she hasn't been in for a few weeks. Diane, not Julia." Still, I persisted. "Do you know where I can find her? It's really important." The woman shrugged. "She crashes at the women's shelter on Valencia sometimes. You could try there." The women's shelter was a dead end. Yes, they knew Diane, but no, she wasn't my mother. When I finally tracked her down at a local cafe where she sometimes worked, I saw immediately my mistake. Up close, she looked nothing like my mother, just a similar hair color and profile. I broke down in the middle of the cafe, sobbing uncontrollably. All my hopes, my savings, my careful planning, all for nothing. The barista, concerned, asked if there was someone she could call. Through my tears, I gave her the Grants' phone number, not expecting them to come. Why would they? I had run away, left only a vague note. They would probably tell the barista to contact social services. But 8 hours later, as I sat huddled on a bench outside the bus station, a familiar car pulled up. Mr. Grant stepped out, his face drawn with worry, not anger. "Let's go home." Penelope was all he said as he helped me into the car. The drive back was mostly silent. I waited for the lecture, the punishment, the inevitable. I told the social worker this isn't working out. Instead, when we stopped for food at a roadside diner, Mr. Grant simply asked, "Dear son, did you find what you were looking for?" I shook my head, tears threatening again. "It wasn't her." He nodded thoughtfully. "You're not the first foster kid to go looking, and you won't be the last. Next time, though, talk to us first. We might be able to help." There was no lecture, no punishment, just a quiet acceptance that changed something fundamental in me. For the first time, I began to consider that perhaps family wasn't only biological. Perhaps it could be chosen, built slowly through trust and care. That night back at the Grants' house, Mrs. Grant hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you're safe," she whispered. "This is still your home for as long as you want it to be." I stayed with the Grants until I graduated high school, slowly allowing myself to accept their love, though a part of me remained guarded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. At 18, I received news that would change the course of my life. A prestigious art school in Boston had offered me a scholarship. Mr. Franklin had submitted my portfolio without telling me, believing in my talent more than I did myself. The day I left for college was bittersweet. The Grants helped me pack actual suitcases this time, not garbage bags. They drove me to the airport, and at the security checkpoint, Mrs. Grant hugged me fiercely. "This isn't goodbye," she said firmly. "You'll always have a home with us, Penelope. Always." Mr. Grant, usually so stoic, had tears in his eyes as he handed me an envelope. "A little something to help you get settled," he explained. "Call us when you land." On the plane, I opened the envelope to find not only cash, but a letter expressing how proud they were of me, along with a photo of the three of us from my high school graduation. On the back, they'd written, "Our daughter, Penelope." College became my fresh start. I threw myself into my studies, spending long hours in the studio, developing my artistic voice. My professors praised my work for its emotional depth, not knowing that each canvas was a piece of my shattered history, reassembled into something beautiful. I made a few friends but kept most people at arm's length. Dating was something I observed others doing, not something I participated in until Jacob. He was a film major with kind eyes and infinite patience. He asked me out 7 times before I finally said yes. Our relationship lasted nearly a year longer than I had allowed anyone to get close since being abandoned. With Jacob, I began to lower my defenses to share small pieces of myself. But when he wanted more, when he asked why I never talked about my family, why I changed the subject when childhood came up, I panicked. "I can't do this," I told him one night after he'd suggested meeting the Grants during the upcoming holiday break. "I just can't." "Can't do what, Pen?" he asked, confused. "Meet my parents. Have me meet yours." "Any of it," I said, already mentally packing my bags, ready to run. "I can't be what you need me to be. All I've ever needed is for you to let me in," he replied softly. But I couldn't. 20 years of abandonment had taught me that letting people in meant inevitable pain when they left. Jacob deserved someone whole, not someone constantly braced for rejection. After graduation, I was hired by a small gallery in Boston's South End. The owner, an older woman named Sandra, took me under her wing. She had an uncanny eye for emerging talent and taught me to trust my instincts about art. "This piece speaks to you, doesn't it?" she would ask, watching my reaction to a new artist's work. Always trust that feeling. Art that moves you will move others. Under Sandra's mentorship, I thrived professionally. Within 5 years, I had been promoted repeatedly, eventually becoming the youngest curator at the prestigious Hamilton Gallery. My reputation for discovering new talent grew, and artists sought me out. While my professional life flourished, I began building a chosen family. Diana, a graphic designer, I met through work, became my closest friend. She was loud, where I was quiet, spontaneous, where I was cautious and fiercely loyal. Marcus, a literature professor at Boston University, entered our circle after a gallery opening. The three of us formed a tight-knit unit, spending holidays together, supporting each other through breakups and career challenges, creating the stability I'd never had growing up. At 27, I bought my first apartment, a small but sun-filled space in Cambridge, with large windows perfect for my growing collection of plants. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I called the Grants, who had remained steadfastly in my life, through calls, visits, and care packages. "We're so proud of you, Penelope." Mrs. Grant said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've built such a beautiful life." For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe she was right. Maybe I had built something lasting, something that couldn't be taken away or abandoned. It was Diana who finally convinced me to try therapy. "You deserve to process what happened to you," she said gently, after I'd had a panic attack when a friend announced she was pregnant. "Not just for your relationships with others, but for yourself." Dr. Adams, with her calm demeanor and direct approach, helped me begin unraveling the complex knot of abandonment issues I'd carried for 2 decades. Progress was slow and painful, with sessions that left me emotionally drained, but gradually lighter. "It wasn't your fault," Dr. Adams said firmly in one breakthrough session. "Nothing an 8-year-old could do or be would justify abandonment. The failure was your mother's, not yours." Intellectually, I knew she was right. But emotionally, that would take more time. It was during this period of healing that I met Michael. He was an architect who came to one of my gallery openings, more interested in the building structure than the art at first. His honest admission made me laugh a genuine laugh that surprised me. Michael was steady, thoughtful, and patient. He understood when I needed space and never pushed for more than I could give. Slowly, over the course of a year, I let him see parts of me I'd kept hidden from everyone else. When he proposed on a crisp fall evening in the public garden, surrounded by trees turning the same colours as the day my mother left, I froze. "I need time," I whispered, though everything in me wanted to say yes. Michael simply nodded, kissed my forehead and said, "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Those words, "I'm not going anywhere," echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. In therapy, I worked through my fear, the persistent belief that anyone who loved me would eventually leave. I was finally reaching a place of peace, considering calling Michael to give him my answer when the call came that would shatter the careful equilibrium I'd built. It was an ordinary Tuesday at the gallery. I was reviewing submissions for our upcoming Emerging Artists exhibition when my phone rang, an unknown number lighting up the screen. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued sorting through portfolios. There was a pause, a soft intake of breath, then a voice I hadn't heard in 20 years, yet instantly recognized. "Penelope." "This is your mother, Julia." The portfolio slipped from my hands, photographs scattering across the floor. My heart began to race, and a wave of nausea washed over me. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Penelope, are you there?" The voice continued, tentative, yet unmistakably hers. "How did you find me?" I finally managed my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. Another pause. "I saw your photo in an art magazine. You were featured in an article about up-and-coming curators. You look so much like I remember just grown up. It took me weeks to work up the courage to call the gallery. My mind was spinning. 20 years of silence, and now she simply calls my workplace, as if she'd been away on a long vacation rather than having abandoned her child. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone sharper than I'd intended. I heard her take a deep breath. "I want to see you if you'll let me. There's so much I need to explain." "Explain," I repeated, anger rising to replace the initial shock. "You think you can explain leaving an 8-year-old child and disappearing for 20 years? I was in trouble, Penelope," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Protecting me? Do you have any idea what happens to kids in the system? Do you know what it feels like to be passed from home to home, always the outsider, always temporary? I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know nothing I can say will make up for what I did. But please, just one meeting. Let me explain in person." A colleague walked into the office, then stopping short when she saw my face. I realized I was crying, silent tears streaming down my cheeks. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "Wait," her voice was desperate now. "Can I call you again, or would you call me?" "Please, Penelope." Without answering, I hung up. I barely made it to the bathroom before the panic attack hit full force, trembling hands, racing heart, the sensation of not being able to get enough air. I sank to the floor of the stall, hugging my knees to my chest as the room seemed to spin around me. When I finally emerged, I called Dr. Adams' office and was grateful when she offered to see me that same afternoon. "This is a profound shock," she acknowledged, as I recounted the call, still shaking slightly. "Whatever you decide to do next, we need to make sure you're taking care of yourself first." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling like that lost 8-year-old again, desperate for guidance. "That's not something I can answer for you," she replied gently. "But I can help you work through your options and the potential emotional impact of each choice." That evening, I told Michael about the call. He listened without interrupting, his hand steady in mine. "I'll support whatever you decide," he said when I finished. "If you want to meet her, I'll go with you. If you don't, I'll help you block her number. It's entirely your choice." My friends' reactions were more divided. Diana was protective, practically growling with anger. The audacity she fumed over wine in my apartment that night. 20 years of nothing, and she thinks she deserves your time. Tell her to go to hell. Marcus was more measured. "Meeting her doesn't mean forgiving her," he pointed out. "It might give you answers you've been seeking, but only do it if you're emotionally ready." That night, I called Mrs. Grant. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, then sighed deeply. "Oh, Penelope," she said, her voice warm with concern. "What a difficult position to be in. What does your heart tell you?" "It's a mess," I admitted. "Part of me has wanted this moment since I was 8 years old. Another part is terrified of what she'll say or that she'll disappear again. Whatever you choose, do it for yourself, not for her, Mrs. Grant advised. And remember, no matter what happens with your birth mother, you'll always have a mother in me who loves you very much. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, memories flooding back that I'd spent years trying to suppress. The cookies we baked together, her hands braiding my hair, the way she looked the last time I saw her, that final kiss on my forehead. I got up and went to my laptop, typing my mother's name into a search engine. There wasn't much a Facebook profile with minimal information and no photo or mention in a community newspaper about volunteer work at a women's shelter in Seattle. Seattle. She was across the country. Had she been there all these years? The more I searched, the more questions I had. There was no evidence of other children, no marriage records I could find. She appeared to live modestly, working as an administrative assistant at a non-profit organization. What had happened in those 20 years? Where had she been? Why Seattle? Over the next few days, I made lists of pros and cons about meeting her. I spent extra time in meditation trying to center myself. I talked through scenarios with Dr. Adams, preparing for different possibilities. In the end, the decision came down to one simple truth. If I didn't meet her, I would always wonder. The questions would never stop. For my own peace, I needed to face her. A week after the initial call, I called the number she'd left with the gallery receptionist. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been sitting by the phone. "It's Penelope." I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "If we're going to meet, I have conditions." Anything, she breathed, hope evident in her voice. "Public place. My friend Michael nearby. 1 hour maximum, and I make no promises about what happens afterward," I stated firmly. Of course, she agreed quickly. "I'm just grateful for the chance, Penelope." When and where? We arranged to meet at a cafe near the gallery the following Saturday. As I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. In 4 days, I would come face to face with the woman who'd shaped my life through her absence. Saturday arrived with a clarity that seemed almost cruel, sunshine streaming through my windows, the autumn air crisp and clean. I had barely slept rehearsing what I would say, imagining her explanations, preparing myself for disappointment. Before leaving, I had a final video session with Dr. Adams. "Remember, this meeting is for you, not for her," she emphasized. "You control how much you share, how much you listen, and when you leave. Your only obligation is to your own well-being." I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt like armor, a tailored blazer over a simple blouse, well-fitted jeans, low-heeled boots. I applied my makeup with precision, determined to present a composed, successful woman, not the vulnerable child she'd left behind. Michael drove me to the cafe, his steady presence a comfort beside me. We arrived 30 minutes early, selecting a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. Michael would sit at a separate table nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but giving me the privacy this moment required. The wait was excruciating. I sipped water, unable to stomach the coffee I'd ordered, my eyes fixed on the door. And then suddenly there she was. I recognized her immediately, though 20 years had transformed her. Her dark hair, once long like mine, was cut in a short bob with strands of silver throughout. She was thinner than I remembered, with fine lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a simple blue dress and looked terribly nervous, her eyes scanning the cafe until they found me. Our gazes locked, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Then she walked toward me, her steps hesitant. I remained seated, hands clasped tightly together in my lap. "Penelope," she breathed as she reached the table. "You're so beautiful." I didn't stand to hug her, didn't offer any warm greeting. I simply gestured to the chair across from me. "Please sit." She did, placing her purse carefully beside her. Up close, I could see the resemblance between us more clearly, the same shaped eyes, though hers were shadowed with regret. The same high cheekbones, the same hands, though hers showed more signs of wear. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she began, her voice slightly tremulous. "I don't know where to start." "How about the beginning?" I suggested coolly. "Why did you leave me?" She took a deep breath, her hands wrapping around the mug of tea she'd ordered. "A year before I left you, I met a man named David," she began. "He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. But what I didn't know was that he was involved in drug trafficking." My expression must have shown my skepticism, because she hurried on. "I didn't know at first, I swear. By the time I realized, I was already in too deep. He had me carrying packages, delivering messages. I tried to break it off when I understood what was happening, but he threatened me. And that involved abandoning your child." I interrupted, my voice hard. She flinched. "He started threatening you, Penelope. He knew your school, your friends. He said if I didn't do one last job for him, he'd hurt you." I was terrified. "So you left me with Mrs. Abernathy," I said flatly. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought it would just be for a few days. I planned to take the money from that last job and get us both far away. But at the exchange there was a police raid. David thought I had tipped them off. He came after me. I listened as she described going on the run, moving from city to city, afraid to contact anyone from her old life, for fear of leading danger back to me. I convinced myself you were safer without me," she continued. "That Mrs. Abernathy would care for you until I could come back, or that your father would be found." "My father," I interrupted sharply. "You told me he died before I was born." She looked down ashamed. I lied. "He didn't know about you. We had a brief relationship, and by the time I discovered I was pregnant, he'd moved to Australia for work." I was too proud to tell him. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my mother abandoned me, but I'd had a father out there somewhere who never even knew I existed. As she continued her story, the details became increasingly grim. She had fallen into addiction while on the run, spending years homeless on the streets of various cities. There had been abusive relationships, time in jail for possession, rock-bottom experiences that made me flinch, despite my determination to remain unmoved. "It took me years to get clean," she said, wiping away tears. By then, so much time had passed. I was ashamed. What could I possibly say to explain a decade of absence, and I was afraid you'd reject me, or worse, that finding me would disrupt whatever stable life you'd managed to build. "You could have tried," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "You could have called Mrs. Abernathy, sent a letter, anything." "You're right," she acknowledged, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I have no excuse. I failed you completely." We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe surrounding us. I studied her face, searching for the mother I'd remembered, loved, and eventually learned to live without. "Did you ever think about me?" I finally asked the question that had haunted me for 20 years. "Every day," she whispered. "Every single day. I celebrated your birthday each year, wondering what you looked like, what your voice sounded like as you grew up. I kept a journal for you, writing letters you would never read." She reached into her purse and pulled out a weathered notebook, pushing it across the table toward me. I made no move to take it. "What do you want from me now?" I asked. "Forgiveness? A relationship? What?" She shook her head slightly. "I don't deserve forgiveness, and I have no right to expect a relationship. I needed you to know that leaving you was the greatest regret of my life. That it wasn't your fault. That I never stopped loving you even when I failed you so completely." I had imagined this moment countless times over the years. The confrontation, the explanation, the potential reconciliation. But sitting across from this woman who was both familiar and a stranger, I realized that no explanation could ever be enough. No words could fill 20 years of absence. I stood up, gathering my purse. "I need to process all of this," I said. "I can't give you what you're looking for today." "I understand," she replied, her eyes never leaving my face, as if memorizing it in case this was the last time she saw me. "Can I maybe write to you, or would you consider talking again someday?" I considered her request, weighing my own needs against the complicated emotions churning inside me. "You can email me," I finally said, writing my address on a napkin. "Monthly. I can't promise more than that right now." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, Penelope. Thank you." As I turned to leave, she called after me softly. "You've built a beautiful life. I saw your work in that magazine. You're extraordinary. I want you to know I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be." I nodded once in acknowledgement, but didn't turn back. Michael was instantly at my side, his arm supportive around my waist as we walked out of the cafe. In the car, the tears finally came, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of me. Michael held me, not offering platitudes or solutions, simply providing the safe harbor I'd needed since I was 8 years old. That night, wrapped in a blanket on my couch, I called the Grants. I told them everything, my mother's explanation, my conflicted feelings, my uncertainty about the path forward. "Whatever you decide about your relationship with her, we'll support you," Mr. Grant said firmly. "But Penelope, I want you to know something. You became our daughter the day you came into our home. Nothing will ever change that. Thank you," I whispered through tears. "Thank you for being my real parents when I needed them most." The following day, I met with Dr. Adams for an emergency session. We talked through the meeting, my reactions, the complex grief that had resurfaced. I always imagined that finding her would provide a perfect resolution, I admitted. that I'd either hate her completely or forgive her entirely. I never considered this middle ground of understanding parts of her story while still feeling the pain of her choices. Healing isn't usually about perfect resolution, Dr. Adams replied. It's about integration, learning to hold the complicated truths of our experiences without being destroyed by them. Over the next few weeks, I thought deeply about what I wanted. I read the journal my mother had left, page after page of letters she'd written to me over the years, documenting her struggles, her regrets, her hopes that I was safe and loved somewhere. When Michael asked gently if I'd made a decision about his proposal, I realized that in a way, meeting my mother had clarified my feelings. The fear that had held me back, the certainty that anyone who loved me would eventually leave, was finally losing its grip. Yes, I told him one evening as we walked along the Charles River. If you're still asking, my answer is yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and as he held me close, I felt something settling within me, a peace I'd been seeking for 20 years. I continued the monthly email correspondence with my mother, keeping firm boundaries but slowly sharing small pieces of my life. I didn't know if we'd ever have a close relationship, but I was no longer running from the past. In therapy, I came to understand that healing isn't a destination but a journey. Some days the abandonment still stung sharply. Other days I could see how it had shaped me into someone resilient and compassionate. I was learning that I could acknowledge the pain without being defined by it. The truth I'd finally grasped was that family isn't always biological. Family is the Grants who chose me and stayed. Family is Diana and Marcus, who created a circle of belonging around me. Family is Michael, who loved me patiently through my fears. And perhaps in some complicated way, family includes a flawed mother who loved me imperfectly but never stopped thinking of me. As I plan my wedding surrounded by the family I've chosen and who have chosen me, I understand that my story isn't about abandonment anymore. It's about finding home in unexpected places. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It's about the freedom that comes from accepting the past while choosing my own future. What would you do if someone who abandoned you suddenly reappeared in your life? Would you give them a second chance, or is some damage beyond repair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life journeys. Remember that sometimes our deepest wounds become the source of our greatest strength. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings some comfort to anyone struggling with abandonment or loss.